Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. We're getting ready for the second half of our conference today. My name is Tamar Zimmerman, and I am a member of the board. And before I introduce our next speaker, I want to just say that I am the chair of the programs committee, and we do the exhibits. One of the things that we do is the exhibits that Dick Sheaf mentioned that are in the next room. We would love to get more people involved, and normally we post a call for exhibits on the website, and it includes my email and contact information, and I hope you'll all think about doing an exhibit for next year. Generally, we look for exhibits that have something to do with the topic of the conference, but we're happy, again, as Dick said, to have all sorts of exhibits. So please look for that and come and find me. Okay, our next speaker is Angelina Lippert. She is the chief curator of Poster House, which is America's first art museum that's dedicated to the art and history of posters. She has an MA in art of the Russian avant-garde from the Courtauld Institute in London. She's written extensively about posters. She is a member of many organizations, and most recently she has become a board member for the Ephemera Society of America. So we are welcoming her in two ways. Angelina.
So good afternoon. Like Tamar said, I'm Angelina. What is that noise? I don't know. Oh, okay. Oh, it was you? I'm the chief curator of Poster House, and if you haven't heard of us, don't worry, we don't open till June. Yes, in New York City. It's on 23rd between 6th and 7th, near Italy. So prior to working for Poster House, I worked for 10 years as the gallery director of a poster auction house in New York, and my master's degree focused on posters, so posters are my life. That said, posters involving immigration issues have not been a focus of most of my research, so when I agreed to give this talk, it was as much an exploration for my own benefit in the field as it was a means of introducing Poster House and myself to everyone here at the Ephemera Society. Let's see. Hey. As we all know, America is a melting pot. We've been taught that since grade school. Literally over 20 million people, primarily of European descent, entered this country between 1880 and 1920, with Ellis Island opening in 1892 as the country's first federally run immigration checkpoint. My talk really begins a few years later, around the outbreak of World War I, when we first really see posters talking to a non-homogeneous audience. Here are two of at least four examples of a 1917 poster by Charles Edward Chambers, printed in New York and published by the U.S. Food Administration. The imagery is meant to remind the viewer of the hope and promise they felt when first arriving in America. We see the Statue of Liberty, a rainbow-like arch in America's signature red, white, and blue, hints of a harbor, a magnificent skyline, and people in non-specific but undeniably ethnic dress of the old country waving to friends and being welcomed ashore. In case you can't see it, the text reads in this slide in both Hebrew and in English that food will win the war. You came here seeking freedom. You must now help to preserve it. Wheat is needed for the Allies. Waste nothing. Clearly meant for a specifically New York urban audience, this image in all its iterations is only speaking to the new American who remembers being at one point in time a foreigner, but who is now part of a different, inclusive American culture. And what does this new American need to do to support his or her new home country? Well, you take part in the war effort as best you can, in this case not by enlisting to fight, but by not wasting food and by avoiding eating wheat-based products as they were shipped to troops abroad. For anyone who doesn't know, bread at this time was primarily white bread, the production of which only used part of the wheat shaft and disposed of the rest, which in and of itself is wasteful. Moreover, white bread was seen as a comfort food and something that troops in battle deserved more than and those who lived at home could do without. And finally, European farms were ravaged at this time, so sending wheat abroad was encouraged to help save Allied countries from starvation. So here you have the same poster again, but this time in Italian. It was also issued in Hungarian, but that is the rarest version of the image to find, and even with all my auction records, I couldn't locate it. You see the same process of reissuing a poster in multiple languages here in these examples of very simple posters promoting the purchase of war saving stamps. As with the previous examples, these posters were addressing the immigrant at home in their new country, telling them how best to serve America and be American by assisting in the war effort. War saving stamps issued by the US Treasury starting in 1917, the dates of these posters, were different from Liberty bonds or postal saving stamps in that they were aimed almost exclusively at the common citizen. The resulting funds reached just under $1 billion. This poster series is currently in the collection of the Museum of the City of New York. So, like the Food Will Win the War series, it's safe to presume they were focused on the urban New York audience. The text is starting in the upper left and going clockwise in Hebrew, Greek, Italian, and Slovak. And here you have 4 more starting in the upper left and going clockwise in Polish, Chinese, Hungarian, and Japanese. I find the Chinese one especially interesting, given that the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the first major law restricting immigration into the United States, had been renewed twice since its inception, with Chinese immigration being mandated as completely illegal in 1902. As such, Chinese people would not even be allowed to be considered for citizenship until 1943. My general theory, which is not proven, is that the Exclusion Act was more harshly felt on the West Coast, and these posters, being presumably for New Yorkers, potentially had less irony in their execution. That said, they are still asking for monetary support from the people who were not necessarily feeling very welcome on their soil, and the desire to feel included, to feel like they belong, would probably have spurred participation by some Chinese immigrants. It's worth noting that in 1917, a second major immigration law was passed in the United States, simply titled the Immigration Act of 1917. In addition to turning away anyone of Asian origin, which further calls into question both the Chinese and Japanese posters, it also required a literacy test be issued for anyone over 16 seeking entry into the US. While you only had to be able to read in your native language, this does not help explain why so many posters at this time were issued in numerous languages. The assumption was that even if you couldn't read in English, you could certainly read in your native language. That said, learning English was still a priority for most new American citizens as a means of feeling like they belong and that they were truly embracing their new home. As such, dozens of posters like these exist, in which the advertiser, in this case the government, calls upon their memory of arriving in the United States, the thrill of American liberty, the flag of liberty, and encourages them to repay that freedom, that thrill, by giving back and purchasing war bonds. And if that was too subtle for you, posters like this one were also issued, making it quite clear that you were expected to prove your loyalty by participating in the war effort. Not all posters, however, had this shadow of a threat or a need to prove oneself intrinsic to their design. This poster on the left, from the same year as all the others we've looked at, uses the 4th of July holiday to emphasize that we are a nation of many peoples unified through citizenship. The very tiny text reads, "Make it a day of welcome to all foreign-born citizens and an invitation to all residents to become citizens. Make our 13 million immigrants feel that they are part of and have a share in American institutions. Do your part by attending the Citizens Celebration on July 4th. Pledge allegiance to your flag anew by helping others to become Americans first and keep it up." Behind the figure of Uncle Sam and the worker are labeled images of home, school, and citizen papers, which further emphasize the American promise of opportunity for education, work, and land ownership. Meanwhile, on the right, we have a poster for the YWCA's Division of Foreign-Born Women, in which heraldic shields sporting every imaginable country's flag are being held up by the mythical figure of Columbia, a symbol of America. This sentiment of unity within diversity also appeared in numerous posters speaking to the actions of soldiers abroad. This is one of my favorite posters from World War I, a design by the famous Howard Chandler Christie from 1919. Here, Columbia is holding a laurel wreath over an honor roll of names, noted above as being Americans all. What we may miss today is that all of these names would have been recognized as especially ethnic, including men from France, Ireland, Poland, Greece, Italy, Spain, and every other imaginable European country. All in all, over 500,000 servicemen in America during World War I had been born abroad. Such a focus on inclusion was felt all the way to the highest government level, as Theodore Roosevelt stated in his Hippodrome speech of 1919, "In the first place, we should insist that if the immigrant who comes here in good faith becomes an American and assimilates himself to us, he shall be treated on the exact equality with everyone else, for it is an outrage to discriminate against any such man because of his creed or birthplace or origin." This emphasis on unity, on inclusion, was also being echoed in Hollywood, as in 1917, Charlie Chaplin would come out with his aptly titled film, The Immigrant. Chaplin himself, as we know, was born in England, but became famous over here, and his treatment of the immigrant experience in this film is full of pathos in addition to his signature comedic style. Looking at the poster for this film, in addition to the few we've just explored, you can see that the humanization of the other was really happening. In a few short years, we've gone from proving oneself as American to being part of the fabric of America. We're going to move forward a few years here and look at posters from the World War II era. At this point, millions of US citizens are the children of immigrants or have been in the country so long that there is no doubt about their belonging. They have made lives, started businesses, voted, contributed. This Produce for Victory series includes over a dozen posters, but I'm especially drawn to these two. On the left, we see a man who describes himself as an Ellis Island American. He goes on to say that he left the old country to be free, and nobody's going to take that freedom away. It's a smart series because in this poster, it calls on the immigrants' memory of having to leave their birthplace for a better life, a life of freedom, and that the bad guys abroad are now threatening their current home, their current way of life. Whatever hardships they faced back in Europe are made to seem all too real once again, and therefore he, like all other Americans, are working together to produce whatever they can in support of the war effort. The poster on the right is equally evocative, showing a mother and children against a bomb-ravaged landscape. The line, "May you never know what it means to be a refugee," would have spoken 10 times more powerfully to the millions of Americans who at one point in time were refugees. So while the posters are clearly meant for a general American audience, they're doubly meant for anyone who had to leave their country to become American. I'm going to jump ahead here again to the post-war period, specifically the 1960s, once again in New York City. In 1965, the Hart-Celler Act ended the mandate that favored European immigrants over those from other countries. Now people from Latin America and Asia were able to emigrate to the United States more easily, spawning a new way of looking at a target advertising audience. Product advertising up until this time was both incredibly white and incredibly waspy. If you wanted to sell a product to a certain subset of citizens, you went to an ethnic agency. And ethnic products were not generally consumed by people outside of that group. So Doyle Dane Burbach, better known as DDB, was approached by Levi's Rye to create a poster campaign. The brand up until that point was pretty much sold in Brooklyn to Jews. When other ethnic companies had tried to expand their audience previously, the typical method was to erase the signifiers of that ethnicity, to make it plain, inoffensive, nondescript, white and waspy. DDB had the brilliant idea of celebrating that diversity instead, and ended up creating the first poster campaign which capitalized on the broad appeal of an ethnic product. You don't have to be Jewish to love Levi's. You don't. It's that good. While the African-American boy is the most famous image from the series, a whole slew of characters emerged. A Chinese man, an Irish cop, an Italian mama, a Japanese boy, a Catholic choir boy. The campaign itself played up America's diversity through its immigrants to help sell an immigrant product. Our similarities became the defining factor of the campaign, and our love of sandwiches. The posters also became so popular that they received national attention and were sold within a few years as posters for decor. I was in Houston, Texas a few years ago, and a local deli there hangs the series at its shop. The Levi's campaign may have been the watershed moment for advertising immigration because within a few more years, celebrating one's heritage became just as important as being American. The hyphenated American, like German American, Italian American, was now not only a normal thing, but a point of pride. Rarely do we even say today that we're just American. That trend started around this time, so by the time we hit the 1980s, we're getting posters like this one, reminding us all that more Germans emigrated to this country than any other nationality, and that's apparently something worth celebrating. In the last few decades, as we know, immigration has become a heated topic, to say the least. Racially charged and xenophobic posters have popped up across the country tearing apart the fabric which made America a prosperous and progressive country for so long. There isn't much in the way of good graphic design that supports this agenda. However, the poster artist Sabo out in Los Angeles is generally considered the most polished artist speaking out against immigration. Here you see a poster he created in situ saying only undocumented Democrats are anti-Trump. I really don't want to spend an excessive amount of time sharing anti-immigration imagery, so instead I'd like to end this on a more optimistic note. Thousands of artists are currently creating posters speaking about the immigrant experience, both good and bad, and how they contribute to American society and culture. The most famous of those images are undoubtedly by Shepard Fairey, who here worked with Ernesto Llorena to create these two posters about immigration reform. Note that the one on the right is bilingual, a trend we are seeing more and more in public-facing advertisements and protest posters. A trend that certainly harkens back to many of the posters I shared with you at the beginning of this talk. Except this time they are not asking for the immigrant to contribute to the government effort, but instead asking the government and its citizens to recognize the general humanity of immigrants. I'm going to close with this set of posters by Micah Bazant from 2017, not because they are especially graphically interesting or famous, but because they represent a recent movement towards digital posters. Posters like these are created by an artist or group and published in high resolution online, available for download by anyone and everyone. You then take the file to your local Kinko's, print it on color or black and white paper, and have them glue it to poster board. Or really do anything you want with it. The purpose of posters like this is to reach a truly global audience. Anyone with an internet connection can see it, and anyone with access to a printer can print it and use it. It can be in the Women's March in 2017 and then printed freshly for any number of protests, marches, movements, exhibitions, or home decor. Each possible venue or owner proclaiming their love and support of immigrants everywhere. Thank you. Questions? Of course. Hi, yes. Yes, Mark.
I'm not going to do what we talked about, but is the collection, we've talked about it a little bit, but for everybody here, is the collection focused on any particular periods in the museum? Yeah.
We go from 1870 to the present day.
Okay.
And it's truly global. We don't just focus on European Art Deco, Art Nouveau, and Swiss modernism. We go, the second show I'm doing is on posters in Ghana, so we are very global. Anyone else?
See, that was easy.
That was. Thanks for the softball. More?
Raise your hand higher.
Angelina, those wonderful images. I know we're thinking of the posters themselves as ephemera, but is there an ephemera of posters? Like, will the Poster Museum have materials related to, I don't know, the printing, the background, the sale, the distribution, or the
when possible,
influence?
Sure.
Yeah.
Every exhibition will be primarily posters, but to have supplemental items is always something I like to have. So we will have, in the first show, we're having like an actual printing stone, like a lithostone. And so yes, we will always try to include as many supplemental ephemeral items as possible. Yes?
My question is, why 1870? Is that a particularly pertinent date in the timeline of posters?
It's not exactly 1870s. Basically, we're defining posters as a public-facing notice that marries word and image. So not a broadside, not where the image would have been tipped on or printed afterwards. So it has to be the image and the text would have been printed together. And that generally happened but with Charest in the 1870s. Yes, it's technology-based deadline.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, more.
So since the poster house is brand new, I'd be interested in hearing about what the collections are like, where they came from, what your funding is, what your plans are for the future.
Well, the collection is currently about 7,000 items. We collect anything and everything that's poster related. I specifically collect for the museum for exhibitions, so if I'm doing a show on the history of men's fashion, I'll be collecting a lot of men's fashion posters that in the lead up for that. We are not looking at building a blue chip collection, because since I was a poster dealer for so long, I know where I can get those and borrow them, and that would be very expensive. So we're looking at getting the rarer stuff, the oddball items, things that aren't typically seen, and telling those stories. What else did you want to know? Oh, the plans for the, I mean, we have about 4 years of exhibitions planned out already. So we're opening with a show on Alphonse Mucha, because I figured something that everyone was familiar with would be a good draw. If you don't know who he is, if you Google him, you'll recognize everything. But at the same time, in the smaller gallery, so we have 3 gallery spaces, a big one and a little one that can be combined, and then a medium-sized one in the lower level. And in the small gallery space, during the opening, we're going to do a show on cyan, spelled like the color. Cyan was an East German graphic arts group who created some of the first posters that utilized digital aids, so like Photoshop. They were at the forefront of that. So you're looking at posters 100 years apart and what similarities they had. Because Mucha also was experimenting with litho in a way that nobody else was. And he also was one of the first advertising artists to really incorporate photography into his process. So they're both groups that were experimenting, and that's why we chose them. And then the second iteration of shows is going to be in Ghana in the 1990s. They had a massive influx of American VHS tapes, and the story about how these mobile cinemas were developed and the posters that they created to advertise those shows, which is a great economic story as well as an artistic story. So we're really trying to include as much as we can.
I was just wondering, you touched on, contemporary graphic design, and
Yes.
As a graphic designer, I'm wondering what you see as opportunities today, because the government for so long was the producer of posters for social issues, or and that's not happening anymore. So what do you see happening in graphic design and poster creation in your field?
Well, actually, in America, poster design is not the best. I will say that when I collect contemporary works, I'm actually mostly looking to Latin America and to Eastern Europe and Asia. There's a trade catalog called Louvre's Archive, and it just documents like the best in advertising now. And the posters that you're getting in Dubai for McDonald's are insane, but they would never be able to be shown here. So I think there's still a lot of creativity out there happening in posters. It just isn't necessarily happening in the States.
So an opportunity.
Yes.
Will you have a gift shop
Of
with
course.
with reproductions of the posters in postcards by any chance?
Undecided. I'm against selling reproductions because I like the real. But I also I know that people want them, so I'm sure someone will convince me of it.
Well, some of us like things that we can have lots of that are small.
Yes.
Anyone else? I know over the last couple decades, the Census Bureau has actually put together a really beautiful set of posters around the time of the decennial census that reflected all kinds of different cultures, but also some of the places like the Mariana Islands and the different parts of the United States, to basically try to get people to register to vote, and register to fill out the census. Mm-hmm. So I have a two-part question. Do you have, is that type of poster that's something that you would carry?
Totally.
And I don't know if you know the answer to this, but in light of the current administration and some of the things that they've done perhaps to try to suppress some people from filling out the census, do you have any sense about what's happening in the current upcoming census in terms of doing that kind of outreach through posters or other type of ephemera?
The short answer is no. No, I don't.
Did you have a question?
Oh, there's more.
Couldn't tell if that was a stretch or a question.
Will the museum, if it's collecting everything poster, will you be collecting poster stamps?
No, no.
Okay.
I mean, we will certainly display them if related to a show that we have going on, but that becomes a very large animal if we start collecting poster stamps too.
Yes, it does. So is there a minimal size to something being constituting a poster?
There's no minimal size, but I mean, it's kind of like I know it when I see it. But it needs to be something that would have been public facing, and by that I mean posted. On a wall, so like not a handbill.
I'm absolutely fascinated by your talk. Thank you so much. And I can't wait for the museum to open. And I have two questions. One is, you're going to be presenting stuff from the extreme right and the extreme left, right? What
I
kinds
mean,
of...
if that show happens, yes.
Right. I'm just curious how you plan to, I don't know, temper or couch or trigger warnings for some of the extreme stuff.
I mean, I'm personally not a fan of trigger warnings, but that's just me. No, I think that ignoring certain things that appear in posters, no matter what side of the aisle they are representing, it serves no purpose because it's denying or ignoring a certain part of history. For example, one show that I am planning is a show on Ludwig Holbein, and his early designs are amazing, but he also supported the Nazi Party, and there are definitely posters that he did that are for the SS. And I'm not going to not show them, because in order to understand him as an artist, you also have to know what else he did. So I think just presenting it tastefully is important, but I wouldn't deny or ignore certain parts that are uncomfortable.
Looking forward to that. And my second question is, what's the opening date?
Mid-June.
Okay.
We're waiting for the certificate of occupancy.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Goodbye.